Pokémon Company just patented summoning a creature to fight another. At least that's the story circulating around right now. It's not as drastic as that, but the patent still sets a frightening precedent for the games industry. Before we go any further, let me be clear about one thing. I am not a lawyer, and this video is not legal advice. But I am a computer science student and an indie game developer. I've been making games for about 10 years, and in that time, I've made and released countless games. All of them are playable on my itch.io page, and I'm currently working on a caving-inspired horror game called Polyphemus. And there's a link to wishlist that in the description if that sounds interesting to you. All that is to say, I've got some experience making games, so I'm going to focus on analyzing these patents from a game developer's perspective. Before we dive straight into these patents, we need to lay the groundwork for what we're discussing in this video. To start with, what even is a patent, and what does it do? Well, according to the US Patent and Trademark Office, a US patent legally protects technical inventions like chemical compositions or mechanical processes from being reproduced, copied, or remade by other people/companies. In order for a patent to be issued, an invention must be able to be used, aka not just a theory, have a clear description of how to make and use it. It needs to be new or novel, which means it needs to be something that's not been done before, and it needs to be something that's not obvious, which basically means it can't be something that would be a predictable next step for existing technologies. Now you may be thinking to yourself, wait a minute, but do game mechanics really count as technical inventions? Well, unfortunately, there is precedent for specific implementations of game mechanics being patented. In 1995, Bandai Namco filed an infamous patent for a system that loaded a quote-unquote auxiliary game to be played while the main game was being loaded with US patent 5718632A. Since 2015, that patent has expired, but for a long time, this essentially prevented developers from implementing mini-games in their game's loading screens. At least, that was the perception of it. This patent didn't actually prevent the development of playable loading screens, like a lot of people say, just this system of loading the secondary game's code before the main game's code. Despite this, we've rarely seen playable loading screens, even in games with super long load times that could really have used it. Remember how long it took to load up GTA 5? Even though this patent didn't protect the development of playable minigames during loading screens, people thought it did. The perception of this patent preventing this mechanic was enough for many developers to simply just not want to touch it. And that brings us to our main topic. The two US patents filed by Nintendo and the Pokémon Company that were recently granted. The first, US Patent 12403397, describes a system in which the player summons a secondary character and commands them to battle another. This is the patent that most people are talking about right now, and many online are saying that it patents summoning a creature to fight another. But that's not quite the case, and it's a bit damaging to say that it is. Like in the case of the previous patent we talked about, if people believe that this patent protects summoning a creature to fight another, then even if it doesn't, developers are going to avoid summons like the plague. But what's actually in the patent? I'm not going to read it word for word in this video, since it's long, dense, dull, and full of jargon, but I will summarize with language that most people would understand. The patent essentially describes the auto-battle mechanic in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet for those familiar. Assuming that the player controls a main character, they can summon a secondary character and control it with some input. They can command the secondary character to battle enemy characters, and those battles will play out automatically using some sort of algorithm. While it's not a patent on summoning a creature to fight another, it still means that no one else can implement an auto-battling system like the one in Scarlet and Violet. This is bad for games as a whole. To illustrate this point, let's take a look at The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. For this game, Nintendo developed a system of targeting enemies that allowed players to lock on to these enemies. They could keep the camera focused on the enemy while moving their character around without much of a fuss. This mechanic has become a staple in so many 3D third-person games at this point that it's hard to imagine what the industry would look like without it. Dark Souls would be nearly unplayable, and without that we wouldn't have gotten any of the Souls-like games that came after. In fact, we wouldn't have gotten Hollow Knight, let alone Silksong, and we wouldn't get any of the games that are bound to be inspired by Silksong in the future. Games, and art in general, are always being inspired by one another. Without the works that came before, or the ability to copy a thing or two from them, we wouldn't have the flourishing industry that we have today. Patenting game mechanics is generally bad for the industry. The protections that these patents provide don't really help the developers of them. It's not like Ocarina of Time lost money, popularity, or spotlight because of Demon's Souls. A game that just copies another soullessly wouldn't get more popular than the original. For example, Team Fortress 2 popularized the hero shooter genre, but Overwatch, Valorant, and Marvel Rivals aren't just knockoffs with no heart put into them. They're simply worthy competitors, and all of those games are better because of the existence of the others. But Nintendo and the Pokémon Company would not agree with that. At this point, I'm sure you've heard of Palworld and the lawsuit against its creator, Pocket Pair. For those unaware, Palworld is an open-world survival crafting game that features creatures known as pals that you can capture, battle, farm, and build with. It also heavily features guns, but that's besides the point. We can clearly see that the designs, art style, and general idea of pals are inspired by Pokémon, but they clearly don't overstep the line of copyright infringement, so Nintendo is suing them through patents instead. I'm not going to go into the lawsuit too deeply in this video, there are plenty of other resources out there for that, but I will go into one of the 3 patents being sued over. Remember earlier when I said that 2 of Nintendo's US patents got approved recently? Well, this second one, in my opinion at least, is even more egregious than the first. US patent 12409387B2 describes a mount system in which a player can press an input in order to summon a mount. The system will then automatically decide which version of the mount to equip based on the state the player is in. For example, if the player is on the ground and presses the mount button, they may mount a horse character, and then if the player enters the water, they'll mount a fish character. If they're in the air, they'll mount a bird character, and so on. If you're familiar with Pokemon Legends Arceus, you may recognize this mechanic. But this isn't really a new concept, is it? I mean, so many other games have used context-based inputs and have different mounts for different environments. As a reminder, an invention needs to fit 4 criteria in order for a patent to be granted. It needs to be able to be used, aka not just a theory. It needs to have a clear description of how it's made and used. It needs to be new or novel, and it needs to be not obvious. To me, and probably to most game designers and programmers, this context-sensitive mount system is pretty obvious. In fact, many lawyers claim that it should never have been granted in the first place. Not only is it obvious to game developers, but the patent is just way too broad with its language. By all means, Nintendo and the Pokemon Company should lose this lawsuit, and for game developers everywhere, I hope that they do. Love or hate Palworld, it's good that it exists, and the power that Nintendo and the Pokemon Company have to strong-arm developers to get their way spells doom for the industry. If Nintendo wins, then it sets a precedent for all games companies to be able to monopolize mechanics and strong-arm game developers that quote-unquote step on their turf. The unfortunate truth, however, is that it's not going to be an easy win for Pocket Pair. Nintendo has a massive legal team that have the resources to pour everything into this. If Pocket Pair does win this lawsuit though, it will be a huge win for the games industry. If we let our creative freedom be constrained by these arbitrary requirements, the games that should be masterpieces will be worse, or may not even get made at all. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to live in a world without this. Hey you! Yeah, you! Thanks for making it this far in the video. I put a lot of effort into this one, and it's a bit different from what I normally do, but I hope you learned something from it. If you want to learn more things, then I'd recommend you check out the sponsor of this video, Brilliant. For those unaware, Brilliant is a learning platform with thousands of visual, interactive lessons in math, science, programming, data analysis, and machine learning. Hands-on problem solving is one of the most effective ways to learn, and Brilliant's platform is built all around that. In this day and age, critical thinking skills will go a long way, and Brilliant has a new logic course for you to work out your brain and develop those skills. If you're ready to learn for free, then just go to brilliant.org/Dakota Vaughan, scan the QR code on screen, or click the link in the description. Also, if you want unlimited daily access to everything on Brilliant, then they're offering 20% off of an annual premium subscription. But that's going to do it for this video. Remember to like and subscribe and all that jazz if you enjoyed it. Bye!